So let's start by, I'm going to introduce you, Lisa, although a lot of my members are actually members in your membership already. And that's actually why I invited you, because they asked me if I could ask you to come and speak about food security, because they were anxious and they asked me questions, and I could have answered them, but not with the expertise that you have, Lisa. So I wanted you to come in and share your expertise, because I could only give them really half answers to their questions, but I know that you've done this for a long time and you know a lot about preparedness and food security. So let me share, first of all, let me introduce you, Lisa. Lisa is a longtime friend of mine. She lives in Texas, and we have met at several events, face to face. We've gone for walks together. We've talked about our kids and homeschooling and college age kids, and we've shared a lot of other things as well. Emergency preparedness is Lisa's specialty. She's been teaching preparedness skills both in person and online. She's the author of Survival Mom: How to Prepare Your Family for Everyday Disasters and Worst Case Scenarios, and Emergency Evacuations: Get Out Fast When It Matters Most. She's also the founder of the Survival Mom Sisterhood, which is a membership for moms who want to confidently prepare while building community. Because in Lisa's words, preparedness brings peace, not fear. So I've asked Lisa to come and share her common sense, step-by-step approach to food security. And I'm just going to pin you, Lisa, here. And you can take it away.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me and inviting me. I do love to talk about this because when a crisis hits, one of the first things that as a mom you hear from kids or husband or grandkids is, I'm hungry. And it could be that you're stuck on the side of the road in a traffic jam, or it could be that you just haven't had a chance to get to the grocery store. But it is really smart to have an emergency food storage. However, the preconception that a lot of people have is that it's going to be expensive, or I'm going to get foods that I have no idea what to do with, in a crisis. And so I've developed a system that makes it so easy and so frugal. You can really stock up on what you need at dollar stores and Walmart and discount grocery stores. It really, truly does not have to cost a whole lot. So kind of as we go through this, maybe we can even kind of share what some of the prices are that you're seeing. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I am calling this food storage on a shoestring budget. So let's see, let me go here. There we go. Food storage on a shoestring budget. And when I am talking about a shoestring, I mean that this is something that if you only had an extra $5 or $10 a week to go toward your emergency food storage, you can work this system and you can develop what I'm recommending is a 30-day supply. And I'll explain that to you in just a moment. Honestly, right now, if you have been paying attention to the news, you have been hearing words like inflation, 5% inflation in 1 month. I believe they're anticipating a 6% price increase in the month of June. And all of these add up. I mean, we have gasoline prices that have increased. And as we move into the summer, a lot of us that live in places where it gets hot, we see our biggest power bills in the summer when we need that air conditioning the most. So when we talk about prices going up, we're talking about the most essential things that we buy every day, every week, every month. I mean, in my world, it doesn't matter if the price of yachts doubles. That's no concern of mine. However, if I'm looking at the price of gasoline going up to $4, $5, $6 a gallon, and then our power bill increases the same month, and then I'm looking at much higher grocery store bills, well, that begins to kind of cut into the family budget. And we're going to look at a way to make that as painless as possible while we build an emergency food storage stash. You may have noticed that there are still supply chain issues. And we saw this a year ago, a little over a year ago, when there were toilet paper shortages and Lysol, Clorox shortages, and um, like wipes and sanitizer shortages. And then pretty soon, it didn't take long at all, pretty soon the grocery stores were stripped almost bare. And all of that, what we're seeing right now is just sort of a cascade effect when it comes to supply chain issues. I was reading about an ongoing protest at a port along the coast of California, and I forget which one, might be Long Beach, where protesters have kind of come together. They have different causes that they're protesting, but they've come together and they are working to shut down a port there. The Suez Canal, I just read, that is still backed up. IKEA products, the IKEA and Lenovo products were mentioned specifically. Did you know that there are brand new cars that cannot be sold yet because the manufacturers cannot get the computer chips? We're seeing this really as a widespread and kind of a growing problem. In fact, when I went to Starbucks just yesterday, there was a sign up that said that they don't have all of their usual products and cup sizes because of shortages. So I don't feel good when I go to the grocery store and I see that the eggs are wiped out, or I see that there is really very little on the bread shelf, and most of the tortillas are, picked over, the produce is picked over, or maybe I buy some and it's like, wow, that produce wasn't fresh. I've had it for 2 or 3 days. It's already gone bad. So these supply chain issues, they are definitely just a chain reaction. And then we see it, of course, when the cash register rings up a total and we're like, oh, I wasn't really ready for that. So yes, inflation, fears of hyperinflation. I'm a little skeptical about hyperinflation for a few reasons, but one is that even though hyperinflation is fairly uncommon, it's not uncommon, but in the big scheme of things, when you go back to world history, it doesn't happen very often. And in the countries that it has, they're smaller and more isolated countries, and also homogenous countries. I mean, Argentina, everyone there speaks Spanish, and they all just kind of found ways to develop their own currency with a bartering system and so on. That would be extremely difficult for that to occur in the United States. But then also we're looking at just seasonal weather trends. I mentioned hot weather. Hurricane season is here, and there's already some kind of weird depression in the Gulf of Mexico, that could threaten my area of Texas. So we have those seasonal weather trends, and of course, natural disasters that happen, and then power outages. So we're going to take a look at setting a goal of 30 days. And 30 days is it fits right into that little niche of being enough, because 30 days is 4.5 weeks or so worth of extra food. But also 30 days worth is something that isn't going to break the bank. And especially when you spread the cost out over several weeks, or even 3 months or 6 months, kind of depending on your budget, and as well as how much you have to buy. But what we have found, for example, with Superstorm Sandy that happened several years ago, do you remember that? Well, there were people 2 and 3 years later who were still displaced from their homes. And Hurricane Katrina, we saw that people were without power for weeks. Where I live in Texas, a lot of people in my town talk about one hurricane or another, and they were without power for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And 30 days covers a nice amount of time. It buys you a full month where you don't have to worry about getting food. And so it's realistic and easy on the budget. When we're looking at stocking up on emergency foods, one thing that I do not have in my little graphic here is make sure the focus is on emergency. And this food is set aside somewhere that is separate from your regular family food. So if you buy, let's say, 20 pounds of rice and you just store it in your cupboard and you just use it, Well, we have 20 pounds of rice. I know what we're going to have for dinner tonight. Eventually, you're not going to have that rice set aside for emergencies. So it's really important to find somewhere separate in the house. It could be under a bed, or you clear out maybe a couple of cupboards that just mostly have clutter in them. And then that's where you're going to keep your emergency foods. So it's really important, however, that the food is what we call shelf stable. And that means it can be stored at room temperature. It doesn't have to be refrigerated. The food in your freezer, I always keep my freezer pretty well stocked. But that food in a power outage, there's some scenarios where you couldn't really count on it. So we're going to prioritize shelf stable food, things that are canned, things that are dried, like a pasta, for example. That meets the criteria of a shelf stable food. Quick and easy to cook. And what I'm going to be sharing with you today, they really are foods and meals that are quick and easy to cook. In a crisis, if you can just imagine, let's say there's no power and, the neighborhood is flooding, your whole family is stressed out and it's hot or it's cold, depending on the season. You do not want to be in your kitchen spending time preparing some kind of a complicated meal. All right. You pretty much want to heat something up and then hand it to your family members with a fork or a spoon and say, here you go. So that's another criteria. Inexpensive. I mentioned that it really helps a lot if all or most of your foods can be purchased at inexpensive stores. Easy to purchase. Now, I have stocked up on a good deal of freeze-dried foods over the years, but I have to place an order online. I have to wait for them to come in. What I would like for you to walk away from with this class is the ability to go to a dollar store or an Aldi or Walmart or just your local grocery store and stock up today on stuff without having to wonder, oh, I don't know about freeze-dried foods, or I have a lot to learn, or I can't afford it. I'll give you a few tips today on freeze-dried foods that really come in handy, but ease of purchase is really important because I want you to be able to get stocked up quickly because, hey, that next power outage, it could happen tonight. It could happen, this weekend. So we're going to focus on just, getting these foods purchased quickly. Nutritious, it really does help because the more nutritious something is and the more satiated everyone feels, then it just is, comfort foods are called comfort foods for a reason. And if they're highly nutritious and everyone feels good eating them, then you're just one step ahead. Actually, maybe you're like maybe one or two notches down on the level of stress. So you want foods that are nutritious. And then finally, edible. There is no point in stocking up on canned lima beans, for example, if no one is ever going to eat them. I just gave away a couple cans of hominy not too long ago. I don't know what I was thinking because my kids have never had hominy, but I had it, in my pantry. And eventually it was like, okay, Lisa, you're never going to make that hominy. Let's give it to someone who appreciates hominy. So I did. You're going to reach your 30-day goal faster and cheaper with a system. Now, I've got to tell you, the town that I live in, it was hit hard by Hurricane Harvey about, 3 or 4 years ago. And the grocery stores were emptied and people were buying whatever they could get their hands on. So the worst time of all to stock up on and do any kind of emergency preparedness, the worst time to stock up on food is when your back is to the wall and that hurricane is like 12 hours away. And now you're just buying the most expensive foods, the expensive foods that are left. So when you buy just a little at a time over a period of time, and you have a system for doing that, this is going to come together amazingly quickly. So my system is this: start with a starch. Now, you may be thinking, well, I am on keto or I eat low carb. The reason that I want you to start with a starch, two reasons. Number one, in an emergency, we're talking about an emergency, you probably will have to let some dietary preferences go, as long as it isn't something that's going to trigger an allergy or trigger some kind of a food sensitivity. So you can plan around that. But when the power goes out, if there is some dire situation, and let's say, you're seeing that prices have increased so much, you really have to cut down on your food and you really have to go super low budget. You're going to be grateful. This 10-pound bag of rice, 10 pounds, that was $4.25 at Aldi. And that much rice, it makes a lot of servings. So you're going to be glad to have something like this, even though you might, normally, shy away from rice or brown rice or pasta or whatever. But we're going to start with a starch, and I'm going to show you how the system works. Rice, I'm going to use rice as probably my primary example today, but it meets all of these criteria. It's shelf stable. You can store it at room temperature. It's quick and easy to cook. Just boiling water is really all you need. If the power goes out, then you can buy minute rice and you can just put it in hot water. And there are ways of heating water, whether it's a sun oven, a solar cooker, you have some kind of a propane grill. So having a backup cooking method, by the way, is going to be one of your best friends if they're in a power outage like that. It's inexpensive. It's easy to purchase. It's nutritious. I'm a little shaky on the nutritious when it comes to rice, but because of what we're going to do with that rice, it does become the basis or the foundation of a nutritious meal, and it's edible. So here is the concept or the system. You take a starch and you figure out some add-ins. What could you mix in with this starch? Or what could you pour over this starch? And this is the quickest and easiest and cheapest way to get your food storage 30 days worth just very quickly and cheaply. So in the case of white rice, I have here a basic meal. This is my column for basic. And then better. So over in the better column is where I've added other things. For example, a brown gravy packet. I'm going to mix up that brown gravy. I'm going to pour it over my rice. It is not going to be a meal fit for a king, so to speak, but it is a meal. All right. And in an emergency, that's all you're going to ask of your food is that it is a meal and it is going to be filling. However, look over in the third column here, better. Whoops. I'll go back to that packet photo in a moment. But now maybe I'm going to add some mushrooms, maybe some freeze-dried mushrooms or dehydrated or canned mushrooms. I'm going to mix that in with a brown gravy packet. And maybe I have a can of freeze-dried ground beef or dehydrated ground beef. You can make what's called hamburger rocks. As long as you go through the process of making those correctly and storing those safely, they're good for months, if not, many years. So I'm going to add some kind of a protein. And now I have a meal that's not bad at all. So I'm going to have my rice, my brown gravy with some mix-ins, right? So that is what comes in the better column. If you are if you are on the tightest of budgets, just focus right here on the basic meals. So over rice, we could make and pour over country gravy. Super cheap. A packet of country gravy mix, that's that white gravy. Sometimes you can find them, for less than $1. So we're talking about a meal here that is going to be very inexpensive. Pour a can of chili over the rice, a can of soup. Mix the rice in with a can of soup. Maybe add a little bit of extra chicken broth or some bouillon to make it stretch a little further. Canned chicken or cubed Spam. Those are all just very, very basic, and they're going to give you simple meals. To make them better, once you have the basic, especially if you're on the tightest of budgets, focus on basic first. Get those meals, and then go over to the better column. And if you are ready just to start buying now and you're ready to get going, by all means, just add ingredients that would fall into the better column. So before we go on, I want to give you a chance in your notes to write the word rice at the top, and then divide your notes into 2 columns and label one column basic, maybe a basic meal, and the second column, you're going to label it better. Now, if you have a 10-pound bag of rice, think about your family and think about any of the foods that I've listed here. I'll give you some more suggestions for these mix-ins or add-ins a little bit later. But what could you add to rice, or what could you mix rice in with that would make a filling meal. I'll give you just a few seconds to think that over. The next starch that I'm going to go through is, oh, forgot about this slide. Dry mix packets. They can be a gold mine. They're so inexpensive. So next time you go to a grocery store, just find this section of the grocery store. And I think we found these in the area where there were jar or canned gravies and sauces. But these dry mix packets, they had this spaghetti. I had forgotten they made dried spaghetti sauce mix. There was the country gravy. There were mixes, to season all kinds of things. So take a look at those and see what sounds good to you, and then what you might want to add to your food storage pantry. The next starch is macaroni. Macaroni is so inexpensive. For any of these starches, the rice, the macaroni, the brown rice, even ramen, egg noodles, any of these starches, just keep an eye out on store sales or coupons, and then buy, a lot of it. With with rice, with macaroni, any of the starches, do pay attention though to serving amounts, because when my son was living here and he was a growing teenager, he would pile, he could probably eat maybe three cups of macaroni and then pour some kind of a sauce or whatever over it. Younger kids, not so much, maybe a third of a cup for a very young toddler. So you want to, gauge, well, how much macaroni do you buy and how many packets of the gravy mix and so on. But that is something that you'll have to figure out. And I would just say, refer to the back of the rice package, the macaroni package, how much does it say a serving is, and then figure out about how much, what would you personally eat as a serving of macaroni to feel full when something else is added. So here under basic, just take a can of chili or 2 cans of chili and mix in, 3, 4, 5 cups of cooked macaroni. Add to that can of chili, and I don't have it there, but add to the can of chili a can of Rotel tomatoes or a can of diced tomatoes. And here's a tip for you. When you're buying these foods, anytime you can buy something that is already seasoned, so much the better, because then, for example, I mentioned the Rotel tomatoes or the diced tomatoes that have Italian seasoning, the diced tomatoes that have green chili. That is just one less step for you in an emergency cooking kind of scenario. So a can of soup with your macaroni, and over here in the third column, better. So to the can of chili, I could add a can of Rotel, as I mentioned, or I could add maybe a half cup of freeze-dried ground beef. Freeze-dried meat, it's expensive. But the nice thing about having some of that on hand is that you can scoop out what you want and then put the lid on the container and store it for later. It's already pre-cooked. All you have to do is just soften it, rehydrate it in some water, and it's good to go. And also you don't have to use a whole lot. So for example, if I was going to take a couple cans of chili and some macaroni, and maybe I would just use a half cup of freeze-dried ground beef. Can of soup, you can mix that in with macaroni, add other vegetables, add canned potatoes. You can always dice those up. And cheddar cheese powder. So you can buy cheddar cheese powder to make a homemade macaroni and cheese. And that comes together very quickly and easily. And I just put leftovers. So if I had some kind of leftover meat in the refrigerator, if I made a roast or something, I could just crumble or chop up the leftovers, mix it in with a macaroni, and there's a meal. Again, the concept is to start with just a plain Jane starch. Think about the cheapest add-in that you can think of. And I've mentioned, I could also put here under macaroni, the packet of spaghetti sauce. And the nice thing about that is, unlike a glass jar of spaghetti, the packet isn't going to break if there was an earthquake or, someone dropped it off of a shelf. In your notes, just write the word macaroni and then basic and better. and add anything that comes to mind. Here are a few additional starches. Brown rice. Brown rice has a shorter shelf life than white rice, but nevertheless, it's something else. Just if you wanted, something that was a little healthier, it has more fiber. That's another possibility. I want to mention canned beans. Okay. Um, we just had a repairman come to the door. Canned beans. Now, here I would highly recommend canned beans that are seasoned. So, seasoned chili beans, ranch style beans. Those you don't even have to worry about adding salt or pepper or chili powder. It's already in there. But I like canned beans, and I have dried beans here too, is number 3. But the advantage of canned beans is that they're already cooked. When you have dried beans are going to require water for soaking, water for cooking, fuel for cooking, and it's going to require, a good amount of time. You can open up a can of ranch style beans, pour it over some rice, or mix it in with some macaroni and a can of Rotel tomatoes, and bingo, you have chili mac. I mean, it's pretty easy to do something like that. Other pastas, potatoes, you can buy dehydrated potato slices, cubed potatoes, egg noodles, ramen noodles. Very, very, very easy. And all of these are inexpensive. I told you that I would share a few other mix-in ideas for you. So I'm just going to let you take a look at this list and jot down just really quickly in your notes anything that you're like, oh, yes, I know I can buy that cheaply. And I know that we would eat that. So just take a few seconds to look at that list and then add anything to your notes. I'm going to add one other important add-in. I have noticed that when I eat a meal that is higher in carbohydrates, I get hungry faster. In the mornings, when I have one of my big coffees and I add a tablespoon of butter and I add a tablespoon of coconut oil and a tablespoon or 2 or 4 or 5 of heavy cream, and then I blend it all together, that keeps me feeling full and satiated for hours. It might be 3 or 4 o'clock before I start feeling hungry. These meals, for the most part, they're higher in carbs. So you don't really want to begin using this in an emergency and then have the kids or the grandkids or your husband or, family members, loved ones start complaining, 30 minutes later that they're hungry. So I want you to add one more thing to your list, and that is some form of oil. I don't recommend canola. I don't recommend vegetable oil. Instead, I would stock up on olive oil, coconut oil, some of those, just a healthier oil, and as well as ghee. So let's say that you have your rice and you have your gravy and you have your vegetables and it's all looking really good. Put a couple tablespoons of ghee in it, or a couple tablespoons of olive oil. And that added fat is going to help everyone stay full longer. And I feel that's a really important step in this whole system, because feeling hungry in a crisis is not, it's going to make everything worse. Finally, you want to make sure that proper storage is a must. And you want to protect your food. You always want to store it in the coolest part of the house. Out of all of these different, what I call enemies of food storage, all of these that you see here, the 6, heat is the one that will deteriorate food the quickest. So you never ever store food ever in a garage, in an attic, anywhere that is not going to be room temperature year round. Whenever the heat goes up, and it's up for, let's say, several days or weeks or whatever, that is deteriorating the food. And here's what begins happening. It begins affecting the nutrients of the food. Now, the food doesn't become poisonous. So just because you have, a bag of pasta that's been sitting there for 5 years, the pasta doesn't become poison, right? However, it has lost the nutritive value. It has lost that. It may not cook the way that, in the case of pasta, it may not cook the same way that a fresher pasta would cook. Old food can lose its flavor, its color, its texture. And if you think of a mushy canned peach, okay, that is what age can do to food. So you want to make sure that you protect your food against these 6 enemies right here. So the coolest part of the house, humidity, especially items that are canned. If you live in a very humid place, your cans are going to become rusty, sooner or later. You want to watch out for humidity. Light, believe it or not, light just coming through the window. Light deteriorates food. Oxygen. If you've ever seen chocolate that has like a bloom, they call it a bloom, and basically the chocolate has like white, white on it, it has just become oxygenated, oxidated, oxidated. So you want to protect from oxygen. Pests, if insects or rodents are a problem, you're going to have to make sure that you take measures to protect the food from pests. And then finally, time. So when you're talking about having 30 days worth of food, you're going to set it aside. You're going to put it in some cupboards or under a bed, as I mentioned, or in a closet, where you have some space cleared out. But time is going to begin to affect that food. And this is where you might want to look. I wonder what's going on out front. Sorry. She can see through the window, which is not always a good thing. But this is where you want to do something called food rotation. And that may sound very familiar to you. Food rotation is just simply, let's say if I buy 5 or 6 new cans of Spam. All right. I bought them. They're newer. I'm going to put them behind my old cans of Spam. And then the cans in front, maybe look at the best buy date or the date you purchased it. And if I'm going to make Spam, I'm going to use the ones that are in the front because they're older. So it's just an idea of taking new, fresher food, putting it behind the food that you already have, and then begin using it from time to time and just taking it from the front of that stash. Now, if you have any food storage questions, I am here to answer them. And we can talk about this system if you like, or if you want to maybe share some ideas that you've come across, you can put those in the comments if you're on Facebook, or if you're watching them later, I'll be glad to answer them. And maybe Chris can just email or send them to me in message. But I'm here if you have any other questions.
Thank you very much, Lisa. That was very informative. Go ahead.
You're welcome.
If you have questions, go ahead and unmute yourself and you can go ahead and ask. Sarah's monitoring Facebook. Thank you, Sarah.
I do have one suggestion. Sometimes when we start buying what we call cheap food, maybe you're used to a certain brand of peanut butter, a certain brand of any food, right? You might want to say, what am I willing to compromise on in order to save money? So the cheaper you can go with this system, the more quickly you're going to get at least the meals in the basic column, right? But so maybe I don't care about buying an off brand of peanut butter, but maybe if I had little kids again, maybe they would only ever eat, a certain brand of jelly or something like that. So kind of see where can you cut corners? Where do you just really not mind, compromising on a different brand, and just give it a try. So before you buy a whole bunch of an off brand of peanut butter, for example, just buy one jar, see if you like it, see if everybody's fine with it. Don't even announce, hey, we're trying cheap peanut butter. They have no need to know that. But then you can just decide. And if they like it, then great. You just found something that, you can save money on. The question is, how do you store flour? I'm glad you asked that, Bobby, because dried foods, and I'm going to backtrack just a second. Okay. I'm not going to forget how long, but dried foods like cornmeal, pasta, rice, flour, believe it or not, we don't like to think about this, but at the food processing plant, they will contain microscopic insect eggs. I used to think that somehow these wily little insects would find a way to burrow, through a package. And oh my gosh, how do they do that? No, I didn't even want to think about it. But the truth was, they were there from the beginning in the form of an egg. And they're microscopic. So they really, in any practical sense, cannot be eliminated at that, as the food's being packaged, but you can kill them. So the best and easiest way to kill them is just to take those kinds of foods, put it in airtight containers, canning jars. Make sure it's airtight because you don't want moisture getting into that food. And then put it in your freezer. And I would say put it in the freezer for a week. So just mark on your calendar, hey, the rice has been in the freezer for a week. I'm going to take it out. Let it cool down. I guess warm up. Let it warm up to room temperature again. You want to avoid any kind of moisture or condensation. And then you want to package it long term. And you could theoretically just go ahead and put the canning jars, with rice or pasta or whatever, directly into the freezer. So just to make it, like a kind of a one-step process. But I would recommend that. So regarding the flour, Bobby, the flour can be stored a year or longer. And so with my flour, I just put it in containers that are airtight, that protects it from the oxygen, protect it from light by keeping it in a container that's dark or like some kind of a plastic container with a really tight lid. And if you add an oxygen absorber to flour, if there is any air in between just the individual particles of flour, where it's not going to be much, then that would protect it from oxidation. But I would say at least a year. And if you can, store it in the refrigerator. Yes, because flour is something that if the power went out, it's not going to go bad because there was a power outage and it's not refrigerated anymore. But definitely, if you have the room in a refrigerator or a freezer, store it there. And that's where you should store your extra oil as well for the longest shelf life, because oil definitely gets rancid. And if you have ever cooked with rancid oil, I made brownies once with rancid oil and they were awful. So you don't make that mistake twice. But I was a young teenager and I didn't know what rancid even meant at the time. So that's my kind of long answer to your question.
Lisa, can you talk about the oxygen absorbers that you mentioned? What
Yes.
are they? Where do people
can.
buy them? How do you use them?
Yes. I just taught a lesson on that to my Survival Mom Sisterhood members last Monday. Oxygen absorbers, there's not a whole lot of mystery to them. And you have undoubtedly purchased something that when you open the package, you reach in and there's like a little flat packet in there. And it's likely to be an oxygen absorber. It can also be a desiccant packet, which is going to absorb moisture in the package. But a lot of times it's just it's an oxygen absorber. So what that does is it makes it really simple. You can just take a food, put it in a container, put your oxygen absorber in, and then tighten the lid or seal it up in some way. You want to make sure that when you seal it, it truly is airtight. And the only trick with oxygen absorbers is that as soon as you open your package of oxygen absorbers, and I usually get them on Amazon, as soon as you open that package, they start absorbing oxygen. So what I do is, let's say I have 8 big jars of rice. I get my rice in the jars and then I pound them down on my countertop or tabletop to kind of eliminate, any of the space between, and then add, keep adding rice, make sure they're ready, have all the lids ready to go. Then I open the oxygen absorbers. I'll count out 8 oxygen absorbers. And then I put the remaining oxygen absorbers because I don't want them to absorb so much oxygen that I can't use them. So then I typically will put them in a canning jar, the smallest one possible, just so, to eliminate as much air as I can. Or at that time, if you have, an extra set of hands, you have someone helping you, you can reseal them using something like a food saver, and you can seal them up that way. But once you just put the oxygen absorber in with your dried food, put the lid on, they're going to, over time, they're going to be just sucking up all that air and oxygen, and it's going to protect your food.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about Survival Mom Sisterhood?
I can actually. We are in our third year of this membership. And if I can share my screen, I actually had brought it up. Oh, here we are. Yeah, Survive Mom Sisterhood, it's a community and training and friendships all in one. There's nothing like it anywhere on the entire internet. There are two facets to it. One is training here on the website, and the other facet are group calls. We have 5 or 6 group calls a month, and I have a coffee with Lisa that is a group call, and I have really little mini topics. We talked about hyperinflation this last Monday. So we have this component. So for people who are like, oh, I don't have time for the group calls, everything is right here on the website. But if you're someone and you're like, I would love to just connect with people, I want to share what I'm doing, I want to ask questions, that's when the group calls come in handy. The heart of this is just kind of what you see here. You get started by following these steps. Welcome, get connected. We have a private Facebook group and something that you don't find, I don't think, anywhere else. We actually have mentoring groups. And our mentoring groups, you'll be assigned a very experienced mentor. And she, with a group of maybe just 3 or 4 other people, will walk you through a period of 8 weeks. And whatever your special set of circumstances are, she will zero in on that with you. And what I have found over doing this for now 2 years with our mentors is that some of these ladies, when their 8 weeks are over, they still continue getting together. In fact, this last week, we had 4 or 5 of our Survive Mom Sisterhood members meet in person for the first time ever. And that was so cool that they have become real friendships in real life. But let me just show you here, home and family training. I have different categories of training and generators, organizing preps, surviving a sanitation nightmare. We even went into family estate planning. I asked the members, hey, what would you like to learn about? And some of them said, oh, I'm dealing with my late aunt's estate, and boy, it'd be nice to know about how to write wills. So we have an actual attorney who taught us a lesson on how to put together a will and a family trust. Emotional, mental resilience, seasonal, everything is here. And the lovely thing about this training, here's one we're working on this season actually, is that it's all there whenever you have time. And so we're focusing on homesteading this spring. And we have a session here, how to be a suburban homesteader, micro farming. This one is all about rural homesteading, getting started with beekeeping. There's just a lot there. There's a lot, but really you take it a bite at a time according to whatever you want, what you want to learn and what suits your family. So we have people who, they have a bunch of little kids. So they're going to be looking at things a little differently than someone who's retired and maybe lives alone. There are a couple of courses that you get for free. Emergency communications in a crisis. And this one, let's see if it should be coming up right here. There we go. Emergency communications in a crisis, lessons on ham radio, shortwave, walkie-talkies, using social media. This is actually a full and complete course, and another course on how to put together an emergency kit. And so it's just putting together with 5 videos, how to put an emergency kit together. So you get courses, you get a community, and I can also just show you really quickly how you can get all the details. And that is, let's see, membership. Yes. And this is everything you need here. So the price of this is $37 a month. That is not going to increase. A little over $1 a day. And with that, you get courses and, as I mentioned before, the live group calls, as well as socializing. So we have online parties and we have game boards. There's a lot there. I call it more of an experience than anything else. Are there any questions about this?
Thanks for sharing that, Lisa. I have
You're welcome.
I put the link in if anyone's interested, and I think
Oh, okay.
Sarah's going to grab that link and put it in the Facebook group too, if you want to go later and explore. And Sarah, did you see any questions on the Facebook group?
No questions, and I have shared the link. I'm just having an issue with my computer lagging badly.
Okay. Thanks very much. So I guess there's no more questions then, Lisa. Thank you so much for
You're welcome.
for joining us and for sharing your expertise. That was very informative. And for answering our questions. I'm sure we're going to put the recording up in the group, and I'm sure people who didn't make it today live will want to come and listen to what you have to share. I found it really helpful that you talked about rotation, because I was wondering about that. How do you rotate the supplies, especially if you're following, say, a keto diet, but you bought rice for emergencies? How would you rotate that? And how long? So you said that those kinds of things will last a year. And you mentioned also having macaroni that's 5 years old. So that was interesting to me. During Y2K, I bought, a 50-pound bag of rice and a 50-pound bag of beans. And when we moved, I moved the beans with us. Like, that was 5 years later. And then finally fed the beans to my chickens. And because we never ate the beans. So that's 50 pounds of beans goes a long, long, long way.
Oh my gosh.
Even if you eat beans. So it's interesting to me that you talked about rotating it. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I will get this up also on YouTube for people, and I will share in the membership site the recording for those who didn't get to listen in. And also just a reminder that Lisa said she would come back and answer questions. So if you do have questions, you can forward them to me, and I'll make sure that Lisa gets them as well. Thanks everyone for joining us.